open up, start with Revisor Victoria. Welcome to the committee, Victoria.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So as usual, I'll be presenting from the white document in front of you that says Kansas Water Office. I don't know why that, yes, I don't know why that door's not shutting. Okay. So for the Kansas Water Office budget, I'm going to move straight to page 832. On page 832, looking at the agency estimate, the agency estimates revised fiscal year 2022 expenditures of $16.8 million, including about $949,000 state general fund. This is an all funds increase of about $3 million and a state general fund increase of $24,000 above the fiscal year 2022 approved amount. That increase is driven by a couple of things. So item number 2, state water plan fund reappropriations. The agency carried over about $713,000 in unspent state water plan fund monies from fiscal year 21 into fiscal year 2022. That increase is also driven by item number 3, the supplemental request. The agency is requesting 3 supplemental requests in fiscal year 2022, and we'll get into the details of those in a couple of pages. But I just wanted to note that that's the primary reason for that increase. And I'll turn to page 833. At the top of page 833, the governor did concur with the agency's fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. And Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and have the committee turn to page 837 to talk about those supplemental requests. On page 837, the agency has 1 state general fund request for fiscal year 22 and 23. As part of the 2022 reduced resources budget, so as we've talked about before, but as a reminder, in fiscal year 2022, the governor requested that agencies that receive state general fund monies reduce their state general fund expenditures by 10%. As part of that budget, the Kansas Water Office held open a water resources planner position. The agency is requesting $25,000 for fiscal year 2022 to fill that position for the rest of the year. And the governor did concur with that request. The agency has some requests from the Water Marketing Fund, so that's requests 2 and 3, still on page 837. First, the agency is requesting $149,000, all from special revenue funds, for increased expenditures for operations and maintenance on federal reservoirs, and the governor did concur with that request. And request number 3, the agency is requesting $2.1 million, all from special revenue funds, to pay interest on one of those reservoirs. So on page 837, the document notes the state is obligated to fully pay capital costs for water supply storage reserved in Kansas in federal reservoirs. These payments are delayed until additional storage is needed and storage is called into service, but those payments are accruing interest at this time, even though payments aren't being made. So the agency is requesting $2.1 million to mitigate some of that interest. And the governor did concur with that request. And Mr. Chairman, I'll pause for questions on fiscal year 2022 before I move on to fiscal year 2023.
Any questions? Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Victoria, I know across the hall they're right now having a big, the House has a bill that would greatly impact this. It probably wouldn't impact 22, but it would impact down the road. That's not in any consideration in this budget, is it?
It is not. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, being here this morning. Under that Hillsdale Reservoir, when you talk about off from special revenue funds to mitigate some of the interest. I didn't think you could pay the interest on that. You know, once you start paying, you had to pay. Will they allow you to pay interest on that?
Senator, I'll let the agency answer that, if that's okay. They have a little bit more detail on how that payment process works. Thank you.
Any other questions, committee, for Victoria? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we're on fiscal year 22, can't help but notice on page 830, the salaries and wages in fiscal year 21 was 1.3, fiscal year 22 was 1.6. Why the 250,000 in round numbers increase in salaries and wages? Do you have an answer for that?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. About half of it is due to an increase in benefits, and the other half is due to filling up vacant positions.
In fiscal year 22?
Correct. So you might be thinking that in fiscal year 2022, I mentioned the agency was requested to hold open a water resources planner position, and that's correct because that position is state general fund funded. Sorry, that was state general fund funded, but the agency could spend special revenue funds to fill vacant positions during that time. So it was just state general fund expenditures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then one more question. The governor's recommendation on 833, which just recategorizes, it looks like some money. Does that, what effect is that? Is it just shifting from one fund, paying it to another, or can you help me with that?
Sure. So on page 833, yes. So in the agency's request, that 2.1 million to pay, make a payment on Hillsdale Reservoir, the agency submitted it as debt service, but the governor recommended that be categorized as contractual service. So that doesn't change the fund that it's coming out of. It just changes what category it falls under, essentially. Still the same fund, still the same amount. Not to speak for the governor, but I imagine that she recategorized it because debt service usually is related to buildings and structures that an agency owns. The agency obviously does not own the reservoir, so I think I would think that that's why she recategorized it, to better convey what the payment is actually for.
Any other questions? Victoria? So you got to move on to 23.
Great. Fiscal year 2023 is on page 835. On page 835, looking underneath the box, the agency requests 2023 expenditures of $13.7 million, including $1 million state general fund. This is an all funds decrease of $3.1 million and an SGF increase of $77,000 from the fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. I'll start with that state general fund increase, and that's item number 3. So I mentioned for fiscal year 2022, the agency is requesting state general fund monies to fill that vacant water resources planner position. They're asking for additional funds to continue that position into fiscal year 2023. So that explains that state general fund increase. Items 1 and 2 relate to the state water plan fund. The agency is requesting $1.2 million in state water plan fund enhancements, and we'll get into the details of those on further pages. But that overall decrease, all funds decrease of 3.1 is primarily due to the agency's supplemental request in fiscal year 2022 to make that payment on the Hillsdale Reservoir. That payment is not there in fiscal year 2023, so it's causing an overall decrease in fiscal year 2023. And I'll turn the page to page 836. On page 836, looking at the governor's recommendation, the governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 2023 funding request, but the governor recommends filling the vacant water resources planner position with an existing FTE rather than adding a new FTE. So we saw a similar situation with the Department of Agriculture. The funding for that position is included in the governor's recommendation, but rather than increasing the number of people the agency is allowed to have, the number of FTE positions, the governor is recommending the agency use a current existing vacant position for that water resources planner. So the funding is there. The agency should be able to hire the water resources planner. It's just not increasing their FTE count. And I'll move on to the agency's enhancement requests on page 838. On page 838, the agency's enhancement requests are all from the State Water Plan Fund, and they total $1.2 million. The agency also notes that it supports the Kansas Water Authority's request for full restoration of the $2 million Economic Development Initiatives Fund and $6 million State General Fund transfers to the State Water Plan Fund, and those full transfers are part of the governor's recommendation. So still on page 838, the agency is requesting $150,000 from the State Water Plan Fund for a variety of data collection and studies, including a harmful algal bloom study, and the governor did concur with that. Request number 5, the agency is requesting $50,000 to continue its partnership with NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. That program targets harmful algal blooms in Milford Lake, and the governor did concur with that request. Turning the page to page 839. 839, the agency is requesting $125,000 from the State Water Plan Fund for its Vision Strategic Education Plan, and the governor did concur with that request. Request number 7, the agency is requesting $100,000 for water technology farms, and the governor did concur with that request. Request number 8, the agency is requesting $150,000 from the State Water Plan Fund to continue its basin-by-basin evaluation of flood risk that was recommended by the 2019 Special Committee on Natural Resources, and the governor did concur with that request. On page 840, at the top, request number 9, the agency is requesting $500,000 for the watershed conservation practice implementation, and the governor did concur with that request. Request number 10, the agency is requesting $90,000, all from the State Water Plan Fund, to study the Arbuckle Group, and the governor did concur with that request. And finally, request number 11, the agency is requesting $69,000, all from the State Water Plan Fund, for water injection dredging pilot project, and the governor did concur with that request. And Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions on fiscal year 2023.
All right then, thank you very much. Any questions for 23, committee? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned on numerous occasions the State Water Plan Fund. Where's the money come from that goes into that fund?
Sure. So first, as I mentioned, there is a transfer from the State General Fund that is in statute to be $6 million, and that's how much is recommended for this year. There is a $2 million from the Economic Development Initiatives Fund transfer, and that is also recommended for this year. And the rest comes from water from fees, including a clean water drinking fee, a fee on pesticides sold, fertilizers sold, as well as a water protection fee on industrial stock water and municipal water. And I have information on that that I can hand out if that would be helpful.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not necessarily, but you sort of answered the next, and that would be the top paragraph on 838, which the agency states it supports the authority's request for full restoration of the $2 million from the lottery money. So full restoration to the agency, not back to EDIF?
If I understand your question, so it was supporting it.
Make it confusing.
No, not, I'm sorry. So in the past, the transfers from the State General Fund and the Economic Development Initiatives Fund to the State Water Plan Fund have not been in that full $2 million. It's, in the past, it's usually been about $500,000. So when on page 838, it says the Water Authority supports the full transfer, it supports the full $2 million from EDIF to the State Water Plan Fund, because that had not occurred in the past, although it is recommended for this year.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Great.
I mean, from EDIF or back to EDIF, and so.
Yeah, from, yep.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions, committee, for Victoria? 120. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that the funds for the Milford Lake project are for the watershed area, not for algae bloom studies. There's probably different. And maybe that's a better question for the agency.
Sure, I'll let them answer that.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, we'll turn on our attention to the Kansas Water Office. We call on Connie Owen, Director of the Kansas Water Office. Welcome to the committee, Connie.
Am I on? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name's Connie Owen. I'm the Director of the Kansas Water Office, and we appreciate the opportunity to present our budget and to help answer any questions that you may have. We have a slide presentation ready to go, so without further ado, we'll get started. Okay, next slide, please. In brief, the Kansas Water Office is not a regulatory agency. It is the state water agency created in 1981 for the purpose of water planning, policy, coordination, and marketing for all things water in the state. We work very closely with the other agencies that do regulate water and do have roles in the management of water and protecting water quality. We coordinate with the Kansas Water Authority, which is an advisory board I'll tell you more about in a little bit. And the flagship responsibility of the Kansas Water Office is to prepare the Kansas Water Plan, which identifies issues regarding water, surface water, groundwater, water quantity, water quality, all across the state, and identifies and recommends what to do about those particular issues. The Water Office prepares this document, but the Water Authority, that advisory board, actually approves it in the final analysis. Next slide, please. The Water Office has two fundamental components of what our office is in charge of, and one I just made reference to, which is water planning and implementation. And you will see on the slide that that is that orange box to the left that has three components in it. The other major role that our office plays is public water supply program. We contract with the federal government for storage in federal reservoirs. As Victoria was mentioning, the federal government owns the federal reservoirs in Kansas, and the state, through the Water Office, contracts with them for storage in those reservoirs. Then we turn around and contract with particular customers, municipalities, industries, and in a couple of instances, irrigation and recreation, to provide water supplies. So we have contracts with customers who pay for the water. Then we, in turn, have to meet our contractual obligations to mostly the Corps of Engineers to pay for the storage in those reservoirs. Moving back to the water planning component, there are three components of that: the Kansas Water Authority, our water planning function, and drought monitoring. We are the head of the drought response team, and we're in charge of water conservation planning. Next slide, please. In general, to jump right to budgetary matters, the three primary sources of revenue for what we do are the State General Fund and the user fees, which Victoria was just referencing or no, I'm sorry, those were different fees. The user fees from the public water supply program, which I just mentioned, water marketing, water assurance, and access district customers who pay for water out of the reservoirs. The third source of our funding is the State Water Plan Fund. And when I say the source of our funding, that's a bit of a misnomer because we administer that fund. And as I'll explain a little bit farther in, the State Water Plan Fund is kind of a unique beast in that it is a dedicated fund to help pay for water projects that are identified in the State Water Plan. There are a number of different agencies that actually implement those programs. So the money that comes into the State Water Plan Fund may actually be expended through efforts of my office, through KDHE, through the Department of Agriculture, and through the Department of Wildlife and Parks. We also help provide some monies for the Kansas Geological Survey. Next slide, please. Honing in on the Kansas Water Office budget overview, this gives you a bit of a view of our two different programs identified on the right, the Water Planning and Implementation Program and the Public Water Supply Program. These are the salaries, our contractual obligations, administrative expenditures. This is our office budget separate from the State Water Plan Fund. Next slide, please. This is an at-a-glance organizational chart for my office. You will see that there are a couple of vacancies that are identified there, and those are some of the focuses of some of the supplemental requests that we have been making. 1.5 positions have been held open due to the 10% cuts in 2020. Next slide, please. Now we're going to focus back on the State Water Plan Fund. And to start with that, I'd like to describe how do we identify, how do you end up seeing what becomes identified as a priority for the expenditures from the State Water Plan Fund. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, I hate to interrupt you. For some reason, I don't have a copy of these slides, and it's very hard for me to follow that. I don't know if anybody, did anybody else get it in the room?
They're not in order. You have to kind of look through the book that they have. So that map is in the book. It's in
Yeah, I
know, you
found
just
map.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
it's not lined up with this.
Yeah, all right.
So I apologize for that. The budget overview contains this information. For example, on the bottom of page 2, you'll see the Water Planning and Implementation Program expenditures. And on page 32, you'll see the Public Water Supply Program revenues and expenditures. So I apologize that I was sort of consolidating the information in a way I didn't intend for that to be confusing. And pretty soon there will be a couple of slides that we can hone in on that I think will be helpful that are reflected in the budget overview. The map that you see before you depicts the 13 voting members of the Kansas Water Authority. I'm mentioning this to you because this is the beginning of how we explain how do the State Water Plan funds, how do those particular requests get identified. The Kansas Water Authority is an advisory board created by statute that's part of the Water Office. Of the 13 voting members that are on this board, 11 of them are appointees of the governor, one is an appointee of the Speaker of the House, and one is an appointee of the President of the Senate. They are all representative of particular stakeholders and interests regarding water. For example, groundwater management districts, municipalities, watershed districts, and the environment, the public. Try to get every identifiable interest represented on that board. As I said, there are the 13 voting members. We're very happy that Senator McGinn is among them. There are also additional ex officio members that are on the Water Authority. Those are all of the agency heads that are from the various water agencies. So they are the subject matter experts that are part of the conversation and bring information, and they are from KDHE, Department of Ag, Division of Water Resources, Kansas Corporation Commission, Kansas Biological Survey, the Water Office. In all, there are 24 members of the Kansas Water Authority. It is their job by statute not just to approve the Kansas Water Plan, but to provide recommendations for what programs get funded each year. So the Water Authority is the entity that identifies the requests that come in for the State Water Plan Fund. They are also informed by our regional advisory committees. Next slide, please. We have 14 regional planning areas in the state of Kansas. Every one of them has a regional advisory committee made up of local people, stakeholders, and they meet and they discuss the water issues in their particular region, and they develop goals and action plans and recommendations for what they need in their area. They pass those along to the Water Authority, to the advisory board, and those are taken into account along with the agency input for the Water Authority to identify what are the programs with the money available or anticipated to be available, what are the programs that they would like to recommend receive funds for the coming year. Next slide, please. This shows the revenue that comes into the State Water Plan Fund. So this helps perhaps answer your question, Senator Peck, that it identifies that there are a number of fees. There are more fees that fund this than state general funds so far. And the fees account for generally around $12 or $13 million a year. When you look at the graph and you see the purple and the green, those represent the State General Fund and the Economic Development Initiatives Fund. As you can see, coming into the mid-2000s, it plummeted. 2008 was the last year that these were fully funded, the $6 million from State General Fund and the $2 million from Economic Development Initiatives Fund. And there has been an improvement, and we are very grateful to the legislature for working their way back up in recent years. But this year is the first year that at least the governor's recommendations include the full $6 million from State General Fund and the full $2 million from Economic Development Initiatives Fund. That full funding is requested every year by the Water Authority, so they are very pleased that so far it's being viewed favorably. Next slide, please. This slide represents, and we don't need to go into all these details today, there will be a more targeted one in a moment, but this represents the State Water Plan Fund recommended expenditures and for the previous year's actuals and appropriations. As you'll see, there are basically three big sections. The top one is Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Those are the programs that they implement with State Water Plan funds. The next section, I'm sorry, I should have my glasses. Yeah, that's right. I do have my glasses on. The Department of Agriculture is the second big section. Those are programs that the Department of Agriculture, including the Division of Water Resources and the Division of Conservation, that they implement. Then below that is the Water Office, and those are programs that my office implements. There's also one program, the Aquatic Nuisance Species Program, that the Wildlife and Parks implements. And then there's an expenditure to help with research by the Kansas Geological Survey. When we hone in on the Kansas Water Office component of State Water Plan expenditures, next slide, please. Where you can find this chart is on page 8 of your budget overview. So finally, we're getting to what my office budget is impacted by, and these are the programs, again, that the Water Office implements, paid for out of the State Water Plan Fund. And so what I've listed over there from the second to the right column were the Kansas Water Authority's recommendations. This is what the advisory board recommended be spent from the State Water Plan Fund for 2023. Then the far right column is the governor's recommendations, which, with the exception of the top 2 numbers, mirrors that exactly. Now, the top 2 numbers are not entirely the same because the operation and maintenance costs, that's second from the top, those are the costs that we owe the Corps of Engineers by contract. They estimate what operation and maintenance is going to cost us, and that's what we budget for. Sometimes they will then revise their estimate, or their charges will actually be more, and that's what happened in this case. So the amount that we were required to pay the Corps increased beyond their estimate. So in order to cover that, which we had no choice but to do, we pulled money from the assessment and evaluation component that you see at the top. That's why those 2 numbers do not exactly parallel the Water Authority's recommendations, because the Corps gave us a bill that didn't match their estimate, and we had to find a way to pay it. The rest of that matches exactly. I will draw your attention to the bottom, the John Redmond Reservoir bond. As some of you may be aware, there was a dredging operation that had to be bonded for because it was so expensive to dredge John Redmond Reservoir a number of years ago, and we have been paying on that bond out of the State Water Plan Fund $1.2 million every year. It is currently in the governor's recommendations, and the Water Authority did not even address this, so they didn't recommend it one way or the other, but the John Redmond Reservoir bond, the governor's recommending paying that off this year, which would save us about $2.5 million. That's why you see the payment for 2023 under the governor's recommendations as 0. Because if we pay off the whole bond this year, we won't have those $1.2 million payments every year. And we've already made the payment for this year, so if the bond is to be paid off, it would have to start next year. So I just wanted to clarify why there's a 0 down there in that FY 2023 column. Next slide, please. This is a depiction of the reservoirs in the state of Kansas, and if you can kind of see the very, very dark blue, those are our Corps of Engineers lakes. And our public water supply program, remember, is we're contracted to pay the Corps for storage space, and then customers pay us for water out of those reservoirs. There's a cyclical nature to that system. And next slide, where we get the money in from the customers, and then we have to pay it. And then we get the money in from the customers, and then we have to pay it. So I just wanted to give you a depiction of this, what we call the Water Marketing Fund. That's our water marketing program, where there may be times where it seems like, oh, hey, there's a lot of money in there, but we have to turn around and then pay it to the Corps of Engineers. So I wanted to just give you a visual description of the revenue and expenditures from the Water Marketing Fund. Next slide, please. Okay, this brings us to the topic of unfunded liabilities. And we mention this, the Water Office has mentioned this every year as something that's been out there and a looming problem, if you will. And this year there's been a fair amount of interest. We've received more than a few questions from legislators on this, so I thought I would just go ahead and address it and put that out there. There has been interest, apparently, in paying off large, right now payments to save money and do something good. So the question has been, if the state was to make a large one-time payment, where would it do the most good? Where would it save the most money? And so what we've identified is what you see there up on the chart. We have water marketing contracts, as I described, with Hillsdale, Perry, and Milford, and others. But with these three, we do not have an existing adequate revenue stream to pay for them. We have to pay regardless. So the idea being, if we pay these off early, we will save the state a lot of interest. So under point 1, you will see if we pay these off, all three together, and any of them at all would be helpful, but if you put them all together and pay them all off this year, it would cost $112 million. If we wait and we pay according to the contract payoff dates, which will incur massive balloon payments, then at the dates you see, those are the amounts we have to pay, and we would be paying $164 million. The savings is $52 million. And I would emphasize that we do not have a way in place right now to pay for this. It's not like if we just pay it off now, we'll save interest, but we're paying on it in the meantime. We're not paying this in the meantime. We don't have current customers. We anticipate that we likely will. But if we get to these dates and we don't have the money, we're going to have to borrow it. And then we're going to owe even more. So we will actually save probably far more than $52 million if we pay these now when we can. This is a really unique moment in time. So a question I've received is why, from more than one person, is, well, what if we just don't pay? Well, the feds are not okay with that. The feds will come for the money. It's not like getting your car repoed. They will pursue us, and so I think that's not an option to consider. And why did we do it? Why did we commit to this much money before we knew we could pay for it? This is water supply. There was a time when there was an opportunity for the legislature to make policy and decide, do we want to lock this in now when we can? We have, in the past, an opportunity to contract with the feds, and the legislative policy was, yes, we have an opportunity to lock in water. Yes, let's do it. And so we did, and that's where we are now. And when you think about it, how many states, particularly where we are and west of us, have the opportunity to lock in future water supply that we're likely going to need, that's only going to get more valuable right now, and save many millions of dollars in doing it? I would wager every state west of here would give an untold amount of money to be able to do that. So when we think about where do we want to put our priorities, what do we want to value, I think preserving this water supply, getting control over it so that the federal government cannot release it when they want to, like now. The Corps of Engineers manages these rivers and these reservoirs. They can release water out of Perry for their purposes. They can release water out of Milford for their purposes. We do have existing contracts that limit some of that, but we could protect all of this, but we can't do it if we don't pay for it. That's a key piece. So I would urge you to consider that in your conversations with what might we be able to do right now that would bring the most bang for the buck. Next slide, please. This is another depiction of what I'm describing. So you have the big or in the middle. So you pay $100 million now, or you pay 164 plus whatever we have to borrow and pay interest on in the future. If we were to wait and say, well, let's just, think about maybe building another reservoir later if we need it, it would be impossible to pay for. The cost would be impossible. I'm sorry? I would be happy to provide that to you. I'm not sure that that's in the budget overview, but I think this is something that is critically important to think about and to consider. We have 2/3 of the state that relies on our public water supply system, and the projections for growth only go up. And we're not sure what the future will bring. We're seeing drier and hotter times, so it might be very prudent to consider taking advantage of this now. Based on what other states are paying for water, it's supremely cheap, even though these numbers don't look supremely cheap. So that closes out my overview, and I am happy to stand for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Senator McGinn?
What was that last comment? What portion of the state uses the reservoirs?
2/3
Is that population or is that geographical?
population. For water supply, for drinking supply, municipalities.
Interesting. Okay. I just have a comment, if I might, go to a couple of items. Let's see, I think it was in here. On the education, Vision Strategic Education Plan, on page 839 of your budget book. I just always get nervous when we start a new educational program. Mm-hmm. And I don't recall this. I know that we did talk a little bit about this, but did we put parameters in as to limits on who we're going to reach out to and what topics? And I mean, are we just going to develop it?
We would develop it, and I believe that would be in cooperation with the Kansas Water Authority to reach out. But when we went through the process of taking in comments from all the regional advisory committees for the updating of the Kansas Water Plan, which is going on right now, if I'm not mistaken, every regional advisory committee, or almost everyone, said we need more education. People don't understand, how water works where we are, with the value of it, how we use it, and there was a unanimous outcry for additional awareness. So we've been in conversations with the Department of Education to try and help with developing curriculum in schools to help people help students of all ages on into secondary and hopefully college opportunities as well, to better understand the water cycle in Kansas. What does it mean to say we have irrigation out of the Ogallala Aquifer? What does it mean to say we have sedimentation in reservoirs? Where does your individual water come from when you turn on the tap? And how can you be engaged in that process? There have not been specific guidelines yet developed.
Developing that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think about my tea. If I spill this, it's going to go all over the place. A small amount. And that's what I'm saying. Sometimes we spread ourselves so much.
Yeah.
You just mentioned everything from a little child to college kids. And I hope we remain focused.
We would have to be focused because we would be limited with what we could do.
Because I know they've asked for this for a number of years, something similar to this. And then my only other comment is, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we can put this in the budget as any kind of advice, but the water technology farms, and I mean, you know, I've been critical for a long time. They do good things. No doubt about it. There were 17, and are we going to be able to add how many more? We have 17.
Well, the thoughts on that are to continue to help fund the ones we have and to develop some that are more focused on water quality and spread the program a little bit eastern into the state. And so we don't have those in line yet, but that's what we're hoping to do, is to expand that program. So we don't have a targeted number of how many more we want to develop, but the information that we get from the water technology farms is very, very helpful in educating and helping with the adoption of water reducing practices.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I want outcomes. I
Right.
brought that up at our last meeting, or last few meetings, or whatever, because you don't want people to just get money to get all this nice new equipment, and then they have one field day, and 3 people showed up, you know, so.
Right.
And I don't think they were recording their activities, so that's all I want, is just, I want to know the outcomes.
Yeah, we are working on improving the accountability of that. We've been a little hamstrung because one of our vacant positions was our water technology farm person. And so we are very excited. We've just hired someone to cover that. So we will have somebody who is engaged, getting information, providing accountability and the data, because that's really why we're doing it. It's not just a dog and pony show, but to show that it works, to show that using less groundwater with the technologies, with the different practices, they're actually improving their profitability. The reason we're doing that is to help spread that word across the state, and the most persuasive message is producer to producer. So if we have producers that are experiencing this, they're the most persuasive ones to bring other people on board with the same kind of thing. So we now are going to have somebody that can dedicate their time to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Redmond, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I was interested about the parts about the bonds. I could not see that chart real well in my eyesight, but that's not. But I wanted to focus first on when you talk about the John Redmond bond. And that was not included in the other ones you showed, or were they?
No, not,
Okay. All
not
right,
with
fine.
those 3, no.
And then it said if we pay $102 million a year, and you know, pay off this $10 million. And so is that what we have left in that bond? Is that about 15 years, or what's the length on that bond?
Nate? It goes through 2030. 2030 is the end date on the bond.
Okay. So about 10 years then. All right, thank you.
See, 10 years that it hasn't, that bond was scheduled to go on forward? 10 more years?
Yes, yes, sir.
What's the life of when we just did the dredging, I've heard that was at 7 to 8 to 10 years and you have to do that again. Is that still the common denominator on?
At this point, I think we should benefit from our resident expert on our reservoirs and on the dredging. So if, with your permission, I'll have Nate Westrup come to the podium.
Somebody else has some other questions first. We're close to out of time. Maybe we
Oh,
can
sorry.
pick it up later. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Send him forward here, Nate.
Oh, Nate?
Welcome to the committee.
This is Nate Westrup. He is the manager of our public water supply program.
Thank you. To answer the question about John Redmond and the need for continued dredging, that was the question? Yeah, I think the most benefit gained by that traditional dredging at John Redmond was establishing the relationship with, we've purchased the storage space and we should be able to maintain it. If the federal government can't, isn't going to spend the money to make a reservoir sustainable, then the state or the contract holders who use that storage and rely on that storage should be able to go in and restore it. I would agree that, you would have to do the dredging, that same type of dredging, probably every 3 years to maintain storage. We are looking for a way to, innovative solutions, alternatives to traditional dredging. It's not feasible to do traditional dredging and maintain our reservoirs. So we're looking, like water injection dredging. We have to look for alternative ways to do that.
Yeah, well, I thought, I understood that was what we were doing, but sooner the better.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Thank you very much.
Should I?
Any other questions? Senator Fagan, another question.
Since we have you up there, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interest is accrued annually on this core debt, is my understanding. And in our deal, I'd ask Victoria about interest. Can you pay interest without it compounding? It was my understanding that you could. You either started paying or you couldn't, but each one of those are different contracts too, aren't they? So you have to understand what each one of them are.
Right. They are all different contracts.
Yeah.
And we have, just for awareness, we have 14 federal Corps of Engineers reservoirs where we own some storage or have ownership interest. There are 5 remaining that have on their contracts some capital investment costs remaining, balances. We do have assurance from the Corps. We ran, in the past, we made the assumption that if you started paying on your debt balance, that you would have to call it into service. You couldn't do prepayments. And our reading of the contracts didn't match what our understanding was, And so the last couple of years, we really pushed the Corps to take it to headquarters and get legal opinion about what we could do. And it's come back that, yes, we can prepay all the debt without calling that storage into service and having to pay operations and maintenance prior to the demand or need for it. So we will have to call it in at the end of the repayment term. You have to have it all in service 50 years after the first use. The first time you say, I want control of a portion of that contracted storage. At 50 years, it has to all be in service. But we can pay both principal and interest.
We can pay interest at any time that accrues for a year, so it's not compounding.
Yes. And I'd like actually to make a correction to the enhancement and what we're paying on Hillsdale is principal and interest. So if I describe Hillsdale Reservoir, we've called, let's say, 40%, and we do that in increments, 40% of that storage or that contract into service, and we did it in 3 different increments. We paid the first, and so you start paying on an amortization schedule on an increment. And there are 2 remaining at Hillsdale of in-service storage, and those are we're paying off with that extra. Just, and that's been our philosophy for a few years now, to pay at the other reservoirs, pay off all the in-service storage we can, smallest first, increase our cash flow, so eventually, yes, we can put it all toward paying down that, our huge amount of debt on some of the reservoirs.
What's the interest rate?
At Hillsdale's 4.012%.
How about
And-
John Redmond deal?
John Redmond is paid off.
No, I mean the
Oh.
John Redmond bond.
Oh, the bond, it's a 5% bond, I think.
Are you sure of that? I'd be interested in that number.
I can provide, it was actually part of the 2015 State General Fund bond issuance. And so John Redmond bond is just a little piece of that 2015 state issuance. It was a 15-year bond. And we are, the Water Marketing Program and State Water Plan Fund are paying the State General Fund back for the bond payments.
Committee, I hate to say we're running out of time here. There's another, move on to other classes. So we have scheduled for tomorrow to finish this hearing and make our recommendation anyway. So we'll return tomorrow and we can conclude with other questions and some of this other stuff needs to be covered by. So thank you all for coming and participating. We appreciate it very much, and we'll see you tomorrow. We won't everybody will get a chance to.
We're planning on being here, so thank you very much for having me.
If there's any in the audience that can come tomorrow, we'll make time for you to get your
Okay.
comments in. So
Thank you.
thank you very much. We're adjourned.